Before the world knew her name, the camera already did. Linda Evangelista didn't just walk into fashion, she sculpted it. She didn't have to try to be iconic, she simply showed up, and suddenly everything changed. It was the mid-1000s, 980s, a time of big shoulders and even bigger egos, and into that world stepped a Canadian girl with aristocratic cheekbones and an uncompromising stare. She wasn't the sun-kissed California blonde or the waifish punk rebel. She was ice and fire, glamour and control. A girl who once said she wouldn't get out of bed for less than $10,000, 0 cents a day, and meant it. But long before that quote became infamous, Linda was just a teenager from St. Catharines, Ontario, with dreams too big for her hometown and the discipline to chase them. She studied the legends, she perfected her walk, she practiced her expressions in the mirror like a scholar studying a sacred language. And when she arrived in New York, she wasn't there to hope. She was there to conquer. What set Linda apart wasn't just her bone structure, it was her commitment. She gave the camera everything: precision, poise, transformation. She didn't pose, she performed. She could shapeshift for Versace in the morning and become couture royalty by Chanel's evening show. Photographers didn't just love her, they relied on her. Steven Meisel once said he couldn't do a shoot without her. Karl Lagerfeld called her the only true model of her time. And Peter Lindbergh made her the centerpiece of the image that would define a decade. 5 women in white shirts on a beach, unknowingly birthing the supermodel era. But Linda wasn't just part of the group. She was the one who gave it structure. Naomi had the power, Cindy had the charm, Christy had the grace. But Linda had the edge, the voice, the presence that said, "I'm not here to be adored, I'm here to be remembered." And she was. On every billboard, every catwalk, every cover. At one point, she graced over 700 magazine covers worldwide. Her face wasn't just famous, it was the face of fashion itself. And with that fame came control. Linda wasn't afraid to say no. She demanded respect long before it was fashionable to do so. She pushed back, walked out, advocated for herself in rooms where models were supposed to stay silent. And for a while, it worked. She wasn't just modeling. She was molding the industry to fit her terms. But power like that doesn't come without cost. And behind the airbrushed perfection, something quieter was beginning to crack. The pressure, the scrutiny, the standards that shifted beneath her feet with every passing season. She had climbed to the top of a world that only knew how to worship you, or forget you. And Linda Evangelista was about to learn just how brutal that fall could be. In an industry obsessed with reinvention, Linda Evangelista mastered it before anyone else dared. She didn't just switch hairstyles, she detonated expectations. It was 1988 when she walked into Julian D's salon and emerged with a crop so sharp, so unforgiving, it nearly ended her career on the spot. Her agents were furious, bookings were canceled, designers balked, because back then, models didn't take risks, they followed orders. But Linda had never been just a model. She was a force. And what looked like career sabotage became a turning point. Within weeks, the haircut was a phenomenon. Suddenly, every magazine wanted her. Every editor needed her. That one decision, bold, brutal, unapologetic, turned her into the chameleon the industry couldn't resist. Because now, she didn't just adapt to fashion, she drove it. She could wear anything, be anyone. One day, she was a 1960s siren in Alaya, the next, a space-age muse for Galliano. She was Madonna without singing, Bowie without music, a character actor in the body of a goddess. And she used that shape-shifting power to control the narrative. She wasn't boxed in by ethnicity or persona or era. She became the muse for all of them. And fashion finally understood. Linda wasn't just beautiful, she was useful, she was essential. That's why Meisel shot her so obsessively, why Lagerfeld draped her in silk and called her his voice, why Gianni Versace said, "She made clothes move better than anyone else alive." She had that rarest gift in modeling, presence that translated through stillness, an ability to make you feel even when she wasn't moving. And because of that, designers treated her like more than talent. They treated her like vision. She walked for every major house, Valentino, Dior, Yves Saint Laurent, Chanel, Hermès. She didn't just wear the dress, she became it. And still, it wasn't enough. Because the higher she climbed, the more she became a symbol of the system's demands. The body had to stay perfect. The look had to stay fresh. The buzz had to stay loud. There were no off days, no breaks. Every inch of her was scrutinized, monetized, commodified. A product, a machine. And Linda, in all her poise and elegance, kept delivering, even as it chipped away at her, even as the exhaustion crept in. Because being the best didn't mean being happy. It meant staying useful, staying flawless, staying ready. She kept rising, but behind the camera flashes, something quieter was brewing. A fatigue that went deeper than jet lag. A pressure that couldn't be photo-edited out. And though she hadn't said it yet, the cracks were coming. Because Linda Evangelista was more than a muse. She was a woman, a body, a soul. And no one, not even the most revered face in fashion, can carry the weight of perfection forever. By the time the 90s ended, Linda Evangelista wasn't just a supermodel. She was an institution. The kind of face that could halt traffic in Times Square, launch a perfume with one blink, or triple the sales of a dress just by breathing in it. But with that power came a trap. Because for Linda, the job didn't end at the runway. It followed her into the gym, the hotel room, the mirror. Every calorie was counted. Every blemish was a crisis. Every morning started with self-surveillance. It wasn't just about looking good. It was about looking better than the photos, better than the other girls, better than last week. And in a culture where youth is worshipped and aging is whispered, the clock started ticking early. By 35, Linda had already heard the message loud and clear: evolve or disappear. And so she tried. She adjusted her look, changed her angles, said yes to treatments, procedures, anything to keep the illusion intact. She wasn't vain. She was surviving. Because in fashion, a woman's relevance often depends on how well she erases the years. But with every tweak, the stakes got higher. The risks got closer to the surface. And somewhere along the way, she made a decision that would change everything. In the late 2010s, Linda underwent a cosmetic procedure known as cool sculpting, a non-invasive treatment meant to eliminate fat cells by freezing them. It was marketed as safe, effortless, lunch break beauty. But what happened next wasn't in the brochure. Instead of reducing the targeted areas, her body responded in the rarest way possible, by growing them. The condition was called paradoxical adipose hyperplasia, or PAH. And it affected less than 1% of patients. But Linda was that 1%. Instead of shrinking, the treated areas expanded, hardened, became painful, irreversible. Her body, her instrument, her livelihood betrayed her in the one way it never had before. And just like that, the bookings stopped. The calls went silent. She didn't disappear from fashion. Fashion disappeared from her. The woman who had once been able to dictate her worth now found herself hiding from reflections, avoiding cameras, canceling appearances. She wore scarves to the store and covered mirrors in her home. For years, no one knew where she went. The industry whispered, the internet speculated, and Linda stayed silent, not because she didn't want to speak, but because she was trying to survive. Trying to make sense of a body she no longer recognized. And when she finally did come forward, when she spoke about the pain, the shame, the isolation, it wasn't for sympathy. It was for truth. Because if a woman like Linda Evangelista, the very definition of beauty for an entire generation, could feel erased by a botched procedure, what did that say about the culture that made her? She didn't come back with a photo shoot. She came back with a reckoning. When Linda Evangelista disappeared from the spotlight, there was no grand farewell, no press release, no final runway. She just stopped being seen. And in an industry where visibility is currency, her absence was deafening. Photographers stopped calling, editors stopped writing. The woman who had once defined a decade of fashion became a mystery, a question mark, a ghost in her own story. But the truth was, she hadn't vanished. The world froze. The woman who had once inspired millions to chase perfection was now showing the cost of it. And she didn't do it for attention. She did it for justice, for closure, for herself. She filed a lawsuit. She stepped back into the public eye, not for glamour, but for accountability. She showed up not as a fantasy, but as a woman. A survivor, a mother, a name that deserved more than whispers and speculation. And in doing so, she didn't just speak for herself. She spoke for every woman who has ever been told that beauty is worth any risk. For every person who's ever felt betrayed by their own reflection. For every model who's ever been measured, altered, and then abandoned. Linda Evangelista had been silent for years, but when she finally spoke, it echoed through the entire industry. When Linda Evangelista finally returned to the public eye, it wasn't with a flawless editorial or a filtered campaign. It was with the truth, raw and unretouched. She appeared on the cover of British Vogue in 2022, not to reclaim her status, but to reclaim her story. The images were artfully styled, the lighting forgiving, but her words were unflinching. She revealed everything. The botched procedure, the pain, the years of hiding. I loved being on the catwalk, she said. Now I dread running into someone I know. It wasn't confession, it was confrontation. Not with the audience, but with the impossible standards the industry had forced on her. And in doing so, she flipped the script on what a comeback could look like. Because Linda wasn't returning to chase relevance. She was returning to demand reflection. She had once been the face of perfection. Now she was the voice of its cost. And the industry, for the first time, had to listen. Because her story wasn't just personal, it was universal. It spoke to every woman who's ever tried to shrink themselves into beauty, to every icon made to feel disposable, to every survivor whose pain was buried under silence and shame. And this time, Linda didn't walk alone. She had allies. Naomi Campbell, Cindy Crawford, Christy Turlington, the original Supermodel sisterhood, stood with her. They posted tributes, shared memories, reminded the world that Linda was, and always had been, the gold standard. Not just because she looked the part, but because she lived it with integrity, with precision, with grit. Fashion had changed since her prime. The digital age had brought filters, influencers, and fast fame. But when Linda reappeared, it felt like the industry paused, as if the algorithm stepped aside to let reverence through. Because some icons don't age out, they age up. And Linda, even through the scars, was still luminous, not in the way magazines used to define it, but in the way survivors glow when they've found their voice again. She wasn't trying to erase what happened. She was trying to own it, to stand in it, to say, this too is part of me. And what followed wasn't just applause, it was acknowledgement. A shift. Editors wrote about her bravery. Designers called her a pioneer. Activists pointed to her story as proof that beauty shouldn't come with such a brutal cost. She reminded the world that glamour without compassion is hollow. During that perfection without humanity is poison. And suddenly the woman who had once hidden her face was shaping the future of the industry again, not as a model, but as a movement. Her scars became statements, her silence became spotlight, her vulnerability became value. Linda Evangelista didn't come back to be adored. She came back to be heard. And in the silence that followed her story, the world began to understand. This was not just a return, this was a reckoning, a reshaping, a redefinition of what it means to survive beauty and still stand tall. Long before her disappearance, and long after her return, Linda Evangelista had always been more than a face. She was a mirror for an industry obsessed with control, a mirror for a culture that measured women by the inches between their cheekbones and the years left on their faces. And for decades, Linda played the part perfectly. She didn't just model the clothes, she modeled the myth of perfection, of effortlessness, of beauty without consequence. She turned stillness into spectacle, poise into power. She was the chameleon, the shapeshifter, the woman who could sell you a fantasy and make you believe it was real. But the truth was, none of it was effortless. Behind every shot was a calculus of angles and light. Behind every campaign was a body under siege. And behind every look that shaped the 90s was a woman navigating a system that only knew how to reward obedience and punish aging. She became the poster child of transformation, so much so that she couldn't stop. One season, a blonde bombshell. The next, a raven-haired queen. She dyed her hair 17 times in 4 years, starved and sculpted, reinvented herself with every spread. The industry expected her to deliver reinvention on demand, and Linda gave it to them. She learned how to disappear into the next look, the next mood, the next designer's vision. And yet the hunger for more never stopped. They wanted her thinner, sharper, sexier, softer, 1,000 versions of perfection, none of them permanent, none of them sustainable. Linda delivered them all. Until one day, her body refused. That refusal, the betrayal she once mourned, has now become her most powerful message. Because in a world still selling the lie that beauty comes easy, Linda's truth has become a lighthouse, a warning, a call to accountability, not just for brands, but for all of us. For every consumer who's ever bought into the fantasy, for every girl who's ever stared into a filter and thought she wasn't enough, for denial, self-worth over spectacle. Linda Evangelista didn't just show us how to model, she showed us how to survive, how to speak, how to reclaim a narrative that others tried to write for her. And in doing so, she didn't just change her own story, she changed ours. Linda Evangelista never set out to become a cautionary tale. She wanted to be the best, the most versatile, the most bookable. And for a while, she was. She helped invent the very idea of a supermodel, a woman who wasn't just a canvas for clothes, but a cultural force. She was on every major cover, every major runway. She could go from couture queen to street-style siren without missing a beat. And the industry followed her lead. She changed how models moved, how they posed, how they were paid. It was Linda who said, "We don't wake up for less than $10,000 0 cents a day." And whether she meant it as a joke or not, it became the rallying cry for a generation of women who were done being underpaid and undervalued. She made power fashionable. She made standards non-negotiable. She didn't ask for permission. She expected parity. She knew what she was worth, and she wasn't afraid to say it. In a time when models were still expected to smile, nod, and obey, Linda demanded to be respected, and for a while the world did. She was everywhere. Vogue, Harper's Bazaar, Elle, Chanel, Valentino, Dolce & Gabbana. She walked with the kind of presence that could silence a room. She could turn a simple walk into a cultural moment. She wasn't trying to look like anyone else. She was trying to become an institution, and she did. But the legacy she ended up with wasn't the one she built in real time. It was the one people rewrote in hindsight. The face that once sold fantasy became the face that warned against chasing it too far. The woman who once glowed under runway lights was now cast in the shadow of a failed cosmetic procedure, and the industry, so quick to celebrate her peak, was silent during her fall. But that's not the full story. Because Linda Evangelista is not a tragedy. She is a mirror, a marker, a witness to what this industry does when it no longer sees value in a woman's reflection. And instead of staying quiet, she spoke. Not in fury, but in fact. Not in rage, but in resolve. She became the voice that said what everyone else was too afraid to admit. That even the most beautiful woman in the world is still made to feel disposable. That the pursuit of flawlessness can fracture even the strongest identity. That perfection, when chased too long, becomes a prison. But what makes her legacy even more powerful is that she survived it. She didn't vanish. She regrouped. She raised her son with grace. She chose when to return and how. She decided which parts of her story to share and which parts to keep for herself. She didn't come back for relevance. She came back for truth. And the truth is, her impact isn't just in the editorials she booked or the trends she started. It's in the blueprint she left behind. A blueprint that tells young women, you don't have to disappear to be dignified. You don't have to be silent to be respected. You don't have to be perfect to be powerful. Linda became a symbol not just of beauty, but of reclamation, of what it means to lose your face and still face the world, of what it means to be broken by a system and still walk back into it on your own terms. She never asked for this kind of legacy, but she owns it now. Not with glitter, not with nostalgia, but with clarity, with dignity, with the steady, quiet power of someone who has nothing left to prove and everything left to say. In the end, Linda Evangelista's story wasn't about beauty. It was about everything the world tried to bury under it. Pain, power, silence, survival. She didn't just walk runways. She walked through fire, through adoration and abandonment, through myth and mutilation, through the hollowness of perfection and the cost of reclaiming her face from a machine that promised magic, but delivered a scar. She lived what most women only fear in silence, the punishment for aging. The betrayal of a body changed, the feeling of being erased in real time. But she didn't stay erased. She returned, not to remind us who she was, but to tell us who she still is. And she did it with no makeup contract to soften the story, no airbrushing to save face, just a woman in front of the lens, this time on her terms. Not flawless, but fearless. Because that's what legacy really is. Not the photos in the archive or the covers on the wall, but what happens when the camera stops. When the world looks away and you still choose to be seen. Linda Evangelista will always be the face that defined an era. But now she's also the voice that redefined it. She made space for truth in an industry built on illusion. She made room for pain in a culture addicted to perfection. She showed us that strength doesn't always look like a power pose. It sometimes looks like a woman refusing to be quiet about what broke her. She reminded us that silence isn't the same as shame. And that vulnerability, spoken aloud, is its own kind of beauty. Because what Linda gave us wasn't just a story of disfigurement. It was a story of defiance, a story of a woman reclaiming the very thing she was once punished for, her presence. So yes, she paid a price, the highest one, not just in bookings lost or beauty altered, but in the years spent hiding, healing, and hurting alone. But what she gave back in return was even greater. A blueprint for how to come back from the unthinkable. A reminder that beauty, real beauty, isn't in the symmetry. It's in the honesty, the softness, the resilience, the ability to say, this is what happened and I am still here. And she said it not with anger, but with clarity, not with vengeance, but with vision. Because when the lights fade and the runway's empty, what lingers is not the fantasy, it's the truth. And Linda Evangelista, she lived it. She fought for it. And now she owns it. The woman who once demanded $10,000, 0 cents a day, now commands something priceless. Our respect, our reflection, our rethinking of everything we thought beauty was supposed to be. She didn't just model for the world. She modeled what it means to take your power back, to wear your scars like couture, to return not as a memory, but as a movement. She walked one last time, not for applause, but for liberation. And that is the price she paid, and the revolution she started, and the reason we will never look at beauty or bravery the same way again.